We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's October 24th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and you're watching News Generation, where we discuss the latest issues concerning our generation. Joining me in the studio is Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning.
And Cheska Dain-hong.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s and share their own insights. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Have you ever binge-eaten, then felt so guilty that you worked out excessively? If so, you might have to consider whether you have a life-threatening eating disorder called bulimia nervosa. Bulimia is when you eat large amounts of food with loss of control over eating, then you try to get rid of those extra calories in an unhealthy way. That includes misusing laxatives or weight loss supplements, or forcing yourself to vomit and even vigorously exercising. And to prevent anything like last year's tragic Itaewon crush accident from happening ever again, Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency has decided to deploy over 1,000 personnel in hot nightlife districts in the capital during this year's Halloween weekend. In a briefing on Monday, the police said they would strengthen crowd control and security measures in 16 parts of the capital. They'll make sure to limit the number of people passing by narrow alleyways all at once by making people wait in line or finding other routes for people. And staying with news in Korea, the ROK Army has forecast with low birth rates like we're seeing now, by the year 2040, we won't even have a total of 300,000 soldiers. This is a stark difference from back in 2006 when we had over 540,000. That is why officials are considering expanding the quota they have set for female soldiers. And by the year 2027, officials aim to raise the percentage of female soldiers to over 15%. Now they're thinking of expanding the proportion even more. And some experts are shedding light on the possibility that women might have to be conscripted to mandatory military service just like men. Here in Korea, all able-bodied males have to serve in the military for at least 18 months between the ages of 18 and 35. So what do you guys here in the studio think about our Army's personnel crisis amid the looming demographic crisis? And are you for or against women being militarily conscripted into the military?
I think it's a very valid point, since we do have a very low birth rate and there are many things that we're forecasting at the moment. If it comes to a point where female conscription becomes mandatory, I think I would be very much for it. It's definitely our country, and I think it's our responsibility to take part in it. The one thing that I would be sort of asking from the government is to have a female pertaining policy, because we do have pregnancy and we do have, family issues. So if we were to go into the military when we're pregnant, or what kind of social sort of support would we get if we have a family to take care of?
Right.
I think those are very, very important issues when it comes to conscription as well.
Where do you stand on this issue, Chi?
Well, it's definitely a concern for our national security, and expanding military conscription to women may be seen as the only way, really, to address this issue. However, views on this topic can vary a lot, because some may say that they're supporting gender equality and women should also be going to the army. However, some may also be saying that they're very reserved to accept this change, really. But if it were mandatory from the beginning, like it is in Israel, where both men and women go to the military, it would have been fine. But if we were to make it mandatory for women at this point, then there will be an issue of equality, the fairness, and also it would really bring about a significant backlash.
For sure. And the ROK Army has made it clear that they're not thinking of this as like the #1 priority or the agenda. They're actually thinking of ways to enhance the livelihoods of soldiers and better promoting that, so people can voluntarily conscribe to the military themselves. But we'll have to see what happens from this point onwards. Until then, that was our news feed for this Tuesday. And let's switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day. We told you yesterday that from yesterday we would be using my AI voice secretary to be introducing our main introduction topic, but actually my AI voice secretary has decided to take a break for today. That is why I went back into the studio and dubbed it, so you'll be hearing my voice till today. And you know what? Today we're going to be talking about what day it is, October 24th. It's actually UN Day. So to find out more, take a look at the screen. United Nations Day. It's a day to raise awareness of the goals and achievements of this global organization that launched on October 24, 1945. At the time, representatives of 50 countries gathered together in San Francisco to draw up the UN Charter. This was to maintain international peace, given that World War II had just ended. The UN now has 193 member countries. Every September, members gather at the UN headquarters in New York to discuss measures to solve pressing global issues like war, hunger, and poverty. As we just saw, today is UN Day. And before we expand our discussion, why don't we briefly introduce the purpose and history of the United Nations?
Sure. So the United Nations is a global organization made up of 193 member states. It was established on the 24th of October in 1945. So this marks its 78th anniversary today. So its primary goal is to prevent war and maintain peace worldwide, especially in the aftermath of World War II, which resulted in an estimated loss of over 60 million lives. Wow. Now, the UN's mission is to promote international cooperation and resolve conflicts peacefully, while also protecting human rights, providing humanitarian assistance, and promoting sustainable development. Now, the UN's work is carried out through various specialized agencies, programs, and funds, such as the World Health Organization. There's also the UNICEF, the Children's Fund, and then the UNDP, or the Development Program, among others. And the UN's headquarters is, as we all know, where the General Assembly takes place. It's in New York City.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I was living in New York, I would walk around and I would see, the United Nations delegates always lining up. Just to add on a little bit, definitely the main purpose has been centered around humanitarian causes, peace, poverty, and of course the environment, which has become a very, very big issue. And here in NewsGen, we definitely commemorated some of the various days that were designated by the United Nations. In practice, when conflicts do arise, I think the main purpose of the United Nations is to rally support from the international community. And one thing that they do is create resolution and present them to the UN General Assembly, which is additionally something that UN does a lot in order to sort of rally the support from all the global nations. And I think it also serves as, I guess, a beacon of peace and security in places that need it.
A beacon of international peace, and
yes.
That's why so many countries are involved. Let's specify it then. How did South Korea contribute to the United Nations, and when did it become a member country?
Well, back in 1948, the United Nations officially recognized South Korea as the only legitimate government of the Korean Peninsula during the Third United Nations General Assembly. And South Korea applied for membership in 1949, the year after that, but was prevented from joining for over 40 years because of the opposition of the Soviet Union, which was a permanent member. And it was finally admitted as the 161st member. And it was after North Korea, because North Korea became a member as the 160th country.
So we joined after North
exactly.
Korea became
It was
a
a surprising kind of fact.
Yeah,
interesting
very
fact.
interesting.
Yes, it is. And for South Korea, it was in the year 1991. It was unique in that it was the only country to really receive help from the United States military command as well. And this is because the UN Security Council passed on a resolution in support of South Korea during the Korean War, which also led to the creation of the UN forces.
Right, we were the only country to receive the UN military command's help. Cheska, would you like to add on?
Yes, I think one of the most nominal and historical event that I personally remember, and I think all the youngsters who majored in political science or anything related to international relations remember, is when Ban Ki-moon was appointed as the UN Security General Council. It was a very, very monumental moment, and I once was also inspired to sort of be a diplomat on the United Nations as well. And as we all know, a lot of global celebrities have also spoken in the UN Assembly, not to mention the BTS that delivered very moving speeches. And as you can see, Ban Ki-moon delivering his speech, it was definitely a moment that kind of put Korea on the map. And we also have a lot of celebrities who are becoming goodwill ambassadors to organizations like UNICEF to sort of rally support from younger generation as well.
And I think it's really worth noting that, as we're seeing on the screen, BTS speaking in front of the General Assembly, that inspired a lot of fans who might not even be interested in political science.
Exactly.
To actually understand what the UN is trying to do.
Right.
And as we are speaking here on News Generation, I think it's worth noting what type of youth-related programs there are out there. Also the initiatives revolving around the younger generation. So why don't we focus on that?
Sure. I think just to start off with, as we've seen, there are definitely celebrities who are trying to promote much more younger participation. But if you're a youth watching this, or if you are interested, there's definitely a lot of activities that United Nations provide a platform for. And I think one of the things that United Nations has done very actively is to put advisors or delegates who can represent the youth generation. And recently, the United Nations put 7 activists on the commission to promote climate changes, or to, speak about the youth envoy in that particular aspect as well.
That's right. And to add on, there's also a mock United Nations, often referred to as the Model United Nations, or the MUN. It's an activity where high school and college students participate in debating agendas, as well as submitting resolutions in different committees. And I also was an active member of this activity during my high school and college years, and even attended conferences in Boston and Jakarta, because they do hold international conferences to really make it seem like a real United Nations for students to really experience what it's like to be working in the UN.
And it gets really competitive.
It really does.
I don't know how you guys were in high school,
yes.
but we would spend like after school hours just prepping the materials, trying to get people to be on our side,
Yes.
trying to lobby.
To be the sponsor.
Exactly. And I remember I too was also an honorary member of the Model United Nations back in high school. It was really fun, but I realized, wow, the actual United Nations must have so many pressing issues to be concerned about. And it's not something you can solve in a day. There's so many different angles that you have to think of. But what I loved about Model United Nations is that it gave a chance for youngsters like myself to be actually being quite attentive to what's happening around the world and what type of issues there are that require our attention. And we're now going to include a Gen Z who's actively been and is contributing to the UN's Youth Directive. Stay tuned for this live interview. To get a better idea on how the United Nations is promoting youth-related policies, we're going to include a Undersecretary General from the Global Model United Nations. It's Cho Hyun-woo. Welcome, Hyun-woo.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me on such a special day.
Yes, happy UN Day. Now, Hyun-woo, we've all been doing the Model United Nations, whether that was in high school or in college. But could you explain to us once more what exactly GMUN does and what type of role you're taking right now?
Sure. So GMUN is our Model United Nations program here at George Mason University, Korea. So while we're registered as a registered student organization, or RSO, which is similar to what you would consider a club in many Korean universities, our primary target is for students majoring in global affairs or conflict analysis and resolution, as these two programs focus on the study of global issues, conflict, and peace building. And our goals at GMUN is to first provide our student body an opportunity to host an MUN event of its own, as we actually held the first MUN ever on our campus this semester, enabling to empower themselves in an academic and professional manner. And what I do at GMUN as the Undersecretary General for General Assembly and Conference Management, it's a long name, I am mainly responsible for overseeing the operation of these simulated education programs in and out of the Secretariat, the correction of some rules, and training of delegates, staff, press, and chairpersons.
Now, before we move on to the second question, Hyun-woo, very briefly, I'd like to ask, as you were taking that role of Undersecretary General in GMUN, what do you think you learned?
I learned a lot of things, especially I think mediating conflict in a global environment, talking with peers, and also using English in such an academic manner is something that I've never done before. So being in that environment, being in a leadership position to actually train other delegates was a new experience for me.
And I think the fact that you're just talking about world issues really does help youth better be educated about what's happening around in the world and what type of attention is needed. Why don't we go on to the second question?
Right. So, Hyun-woo, how important do you think youth is in terms of sustaining or even better facilitating the United Nations and its values?
That's a great question. Today, I think it's increasingly apparent that the world has become more interconnected, yet more fragmented than ever. Information from all around the world is, accessible at the tip of your fingertips, but at the same time, we've witnessed more and more violent conflicts and wars amid a global democratic backsliding. So at the heart of many of these issues lie, many complex layers of history, culture, politics, and economy. And that's why international organizations like the UN exist, for nation states to find common ground and search for solutions. International peace and security are important not only because of national sovereignty, but because of many people whose lives are endangered by conflicts, such as that in Israel and Palestine, for example. So that's why it's also important to acknowledge and empower the role of youth. I see today's youth as more resilient than ever and capable of solving many of the pressing issues that face us today as future leaders. And I think part of that comes from a dire need for us to change and act now, especially when topics such as climate change, as you mentioned, poses a global threat and question on the survival of the entire human race.
You brought up some amazing points, and I love the point about youth having this resilience to take on this responsibility to change the world. Now, in commemoration of the United Nations Day, what do you think is something that the United Nations can do to better serve its purpose in today's world?
So the United Nations isn't without its flaws, definitely. And a lot of people, I think, from personal experience are tired or simply don't care anymore because they don't expect international organizations like the UN to agree on matters or be effective enough to enforce real change. I am, however, hopeful that things can and will change for the better, although it will be a slow and tedious process. Because you also mentioned youth continuing to empower young people and also in the decision-making process, in addition to reforming bloated bureaucracies, for example, I think could help the UN gather diverse perspectives and prepare swift responses for the world's largest issues.
And definitely, it's needed now more than ever. As you mentioned, with the geopolitical situation we're seeing right now, I do think the next generation, us being youth, we need to actively take part. And so are you, Hyunwoo. You're doing just that. Thank you so much.
Well,
it was
thank you so much.
it was a wonderful time spending with you here in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and we asked our viewers about the UN and whether they thought it was doing a good job. So take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of our viewers had to say. Let's start with Tears Bell. Tears Bell said the UN, despite criticism, is important to maintaining a certain degree of peace in the world. Kite said the United Nations is one of the most vital international organizations in the Westphalian system. It's not perfect, but it is a net positive for the global community as a whole. And Sanik said the UN at the current time should stand in Middle East affairs more than other organizations and help give more assistance to the war victims as quickly as it can. We want more peace than war everywhere around the world. And why don't we just mention that today is UN Day, and the purpose of the UN was to maintain and sustain international peace. It doesn't seem like we're seeing the most peaceful times in the world right now, but it's worth noting that we can make a change because it is needed now more than ever. So on that, what should the UN do to better practice their values, which is sustaining international peace?
That's right. Well, to better uphold their values, especially in maintaining international peace, the UN should first of all prioritize early conflict prevention, as well as encourage diplomatic negotiations,
Right.
and also allocate resources towards a more effective peacekeeping operation. And additionally, the UN should consistently uphold human rights and also hold those member states who violate any of these rights accountable, and encourage multilateralism as well. As Hyunwoo said, we're living in a more interconnected world, but
Yes.
we're very fragmented.
That was a
So
really
we
good
need
point.
very good point, and we need greater cooperation among nations in addressing global challenges like climate change. And this all, of course, aimed at ensuring long-lasting international peace.
For sure. Cheska?
You know, one of the most difficult hurdle for United Nations has always been enforcement, because every country always vies for its own sovereignty and wants to take the bigger pie in the competition or when it comes to cooperation. So I understand, as Hyunwoo mentioned, that cooperation is very key, but I hope that all the nations that are part of the United Nations do not forget the name. We are united nation, not separated nations when it comes to when it wants to or not. And I think another thing that is very important is for us, the youth that are leading the future, to really know that there is nowadays we're living in a very borderless and limitless crisis that attack us every second. So international cooperation is not a choice, but a must.
It is. And in order for that to be a must, I think the UN should better understand that there's so many diverse perspectives out there, so many different issues. And one way is by including us, resilient youth. I would like to borrow the words of Kano there. The resilient youth will like to take a part and provide a little more of an aspect, a perspective that is, that could better handle all these different situations around in the world. And in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Jessica Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
Right. And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.